And we're live here on Tried and True, the DC United post-game podcast presented by Heineken. And guess what, guys? Soccer is back.
For post-game.
Post-game after 7 of 8, 8 of 9, 8 of 9 Bundesliga games are in the books. And, empty stadiums, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We're used to being literally feet away from the pitch, and now we're literally across the ocean post-game. But I think everyone had to get used to this sort of new adjustment. I know a lot of our fellow friends this was their first foray into Bundesliga, so there was a bit of learning curve for everyone.
Yeah, it was fun to see.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Sam.
Go ahead. I'm just definitely one of those people. I did not watch the league before, but I mean, it broke records. Bundesliga, I think I saw a tweet. It broke viewing records
Goff.
In the U.S. Yeah, Goff tweeted. DC was the third largest market for these games. So props to our city. But yeah, I think everybody will take any kind of soccer that they can get, even if they're not as familiar with the teams or the players.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit last week about the teams that we know Joshua and Michael have chosen already. I've officially made a choice now. I did some research during the week leading up. I pulsed my sources overseas, and I chose Borussia Mönchengladbach, who came out just smoking yesterday with a goal in the first minute, which was awesome, en route to a 3-1 win. So that's who I'm going to stick with. And Sam, I think you're the last one unattached, unless you've made some commitments here.
No, I haven't. I don't know that I will become attached either. I don't think because again, I don't know how much I'm going to follow the league. Once everything gets back, I'm obviously watching games, and if it naturally happens, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and I'll definitely make that announcement. But yeah, I might just remain unattached and enjoy all the soccer and watch you all crumble as this league finishes.
Yeah, I've seen a couple tweets about, you don't have to pick a team to follow the league.
Allegedly.
And I still somewhat agree with that, or disagree with that. I feel like you just get more invested if you pick a singular team to follow and watch. But man, Schalke was tough to watch, and if they continue to not play a goalkeeper, I'll probably start watching someone else. That's brutal.
And that may be our Twitter poll question this week, is whether you can follow a league without choosing an individual team. For me, I think it might be able to be done, but it's certainly not something I'm capable of. I think trying to bite off an entire league and follow everything and stay interested and motivated to stay up on the news there is a bit much. For me, Wolfsburg pulled out a big win yesterday, went up 1-0, game tied up, and then scored a game winner in extra time second half. So good result, puts them into 6th. Obviously, this lifelong fandom is paying off for me so far, so I'm glad to hear it.
Am I allowed to complain again about the poor management by the Bundesliga for 5 games in one window, or is that just should I just let it go at this point?
I think you just need to accept that. I mean, it's frustrating. But I'd just like to be clear that I agree that it would be difficult to follow a league without a team. My caveat is, again, that I don't know that I'm going to hardcore jump into being a Bundesliga fan for the rest of my life. I'm just kind of enjoying the soccer right now. So that's kind of why I'm a little bit more loose about picking a team. And that's why it took me so long to get into English soccer, because I also don't enjoy just arbitrarily picking a team. So, I just picked an English team over the winter, and now I'm absolutely much more invested into games, and it's a lot more fun to watch. And even though my team is in the championship, I'm still watching the Premier League and, seeing who our competition would hopefully be next year. So it's definitely more fun once you have a team. I just don't know that I'm going to pick a team for this short window, because then I will have to be invested for the rest of my life. I don't know if I'm willing to make that commitment right now.
Well, there were a couple cool things to kind of watch as a neutral observer yesterday. I mean, obviously, my game wasn't until quote unquote my game wasn't until 12:30. So the early window was interesting, and I mean, yeah, you're right. Joshua Dortmund just came flying back, I mean, it almost looked as if they'd just been practicing this whole time. I mean, Schalke's not a bad team at all, and you would be forgiven for thinking they were, bottom of the league after watching that performance. And Dortmund looked great, and something I think all of us mentioned yesterday to each other was how cool was it at the end of that game? When the players 6 feet apart from each other, it went up and saluted the yellow wall where all the fans would have been. It was kind of a special way to return of like, we know you're not here. It's no secret. The players know it, the fans know it, the commentators know it. But the quality of the game was good.
Yeah, but it was kind of like you're not here physically, but we know you're still with us, right? Like, we're still saluting you. We know you're still watching, and you still have our backs, and you're still bringing the passion in all the ways that you can right now, which is why I thought that was super cool that they were acknowledging that. Also, because they did it like 6 feet apart, I thought it was funny. And, even throughout the game, people score and they do the elbows instead of the high fives, or, some of the goal celebrations were like more spaced apart. So it's just interesting to see how the players were incorporating guidelines into the game as much as they could. Obviously, it's still a contact sport, and you're still, touching people and, making tackles and things like that, but they were still following the guidelines, which I just thought was like super interesting to watch.
Well, yeah, I thought it was definitely funny. Holland's going shoulder to shoulder with his defender as the cross is whipped in, and he puts it in the net. And then he goes to the corner and stands 6 feet apart from his teammates.
Well, and I thought it was interesting, where you drew the line on how you're following guidelines. It didn't seem to impact the game itself, but you could definitely tell that like the referee was trying to maintain space from the players around him, even down to the coin toss at the beginning. You saw players sitting in the first couple of rows of the stands, spaced apart, wearing masks. It looked like all the training staffs were wearing masks, but the managers weren't required to for whatever reason. Sometimes I think that having the managers be a little bit quieter and focus on what they can do at halftime when they're speaking to the team directly rather than yelling at them while they're on the field might be a positive move. But on the whole, I thought it was a positive experience. Also, cool to see a couple of ball kids out there. I think one of the broadcasts was talking about requiring maybe 16 to 18 years old, but gotta get the ball back in somehow. I'm just trying to picture some of the stars, like watching Alphonso Davies run up to the 25th row to try to grab a ball, because that's the only ball they've got. It makes you feel like you're playing back at U12, U14.
What did you guys think of the atmosphere on TV? I mean, obviously there's no fans, but it wasn't totally silent. You could hear all kinds of yelling. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. I actually liked it. I thought it was really interesting to like hear the players yelling at each other and things like that. I mean, when else do you get to hear what that communication is? And I just thought it was a lot more authentic. I know there are people who, wanted just ambient fan noise to be pumped into the stadium or pumped into the broadcast. And I understand that, like, it's definitely not the same atmosphere, but that just feels silly to me. I mean, we all know it's fake. I don't know how much that would actually, motivate the players. I did think it was funny, though. I don't remember which game it was, and it was probably more than one, but a goal was scored, and they still played, like, the goal celebration song. Or I know, like, some teams, like, they still walked out to the music they always walk out to. So I thought it was, again, nice that people are trying. It's like this mesh of normalcy and, having to deal with COVID. But yeah, I'm definitely pro quiet stadium.
Yeah, I don't think
the fan noise.
I agree. I don't think that piping in crowd noise is really the best solution, especially in a game like soccer where it's so fluid. It's not like there was a catch in a football game or a hit in a baseball game where you know where the noise is going to be. So much of soccer is the fans saying, hey, we're running out of time. This team is looking flat. Let's get louder. Let's, get behind this team and see if we can carry them through. And I think we saw a few moments like that where, the players in the field were looking for the noise to try to help, get through a tough spot in the game. It just wasn't happening. And it's not like you can't have gatherings anywhere. So it's not like you can say you're going to pipe in people yelling at a pub because people aren't able to watch there either. So I totally agree that trying to create the atmosphere without actually having it being real, that would just feel off to me.
One of the things that I noticed the most, and it was actually comical, this morning during the Union Berlin Bayern game, the biggest amount of noise I think I heard all weekend watching these games was when VAR ruled out the first Bayern goal, and it would you could just hear the entire Union Berlin team celebrating all at once, and it was pretty audible. I mean, it wasn't 20,000-30,000 fans or however much that stadium holds, all cheering at the same time, but it was definitely noticeable, which it's kind of cool. I think 10 years from now, we're going to look back at this and these, behind closed doors games and be like, that was kind of cool. I mean, wouldn't prefer it, but, it was a cool look at it, because normally behind closed doors games are like preseason, or like friendlies, that there's not nearly as much energy. But it was fun. I thought it was fun to see some of the celebrations and the teams getting behind it.
I think it'll be interesting too to see how they change the way they plan the broadcasts. We've seen differences between the different networks on how they mic up the supporters sections versus doing the crowd. And I wonder if you'll see some of the broadcasters really focus on trying to grab that player-to-player interaction out there. I don't speak German, so it wouldn't do me a whole lot of good. But I do think that you can get a lot from that. It's something you wouldn't necessarily be able to grab out when you've got a full stadium of 50 to 60,000 fans screaming at you.
Yeah, for me, it was eerily normal. So I kind of missed the pregame show because Fox decided they weren't going to do that, and they went with the international broadcasters, which I don't think they should have done either. But
Fox is totally checked out on
the
Bundesliga, by the way. They've just mailed it in. They lost the rights. They're over it.
And they could be making an absurd amount of money right now because, like Sam said, the ratings are going to be ridiculous. But despite no pregame, and I kind of like most games do the supporter section as a build into the game. Besides that, the game was the same for a lot of parts. And I've read throughout this week, I tried to pull it up just now, but I've read players talking about, when I played in the NBA stadium, I couldn't discern, it felt my body and my mind were telling me this is a friendly. This is not for real. That atmosphere makes it real for the players. But as a spectator watching on the TV, when the crowd wasn't in view, it looked like a normal game. The teams were going at each other, and I don't know, I just got into it.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, I think, this is the reality. It was super interesting to see the first weekend. We'll see, what tweaks they're going to make on the broadcasting side. But, on the soccer side, I know Johnny put out a tweet asking who everyone's rooting for. And James Lambert responded and said, anyone that gives us a true title race. So how do we feel about that?
Well, I think that's a really good point, and that's one of the reasons why, personally, I don't think I've been very invested in the Bundesliga over the past few years, because there's truly never been a title race. It feels like, and it was funny that, the last time I got to see our good friend Adrian over in England, it was just no matter how far behind Bayern find themselves at some point in the season, it's always Bayern. And I had kind of remembered that vaguely before we dove back into the Bundesliga this weekend, and I was like, I wonder what that table looks like. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Bayern's back on top. But it's close. It's closer than it has before, and I don't know if we're gonna see Dortmund and Bayern again. I don't know if they've played. I'll have to look into that here in a second. If they've played both games, but I know Mönchengladbach plays Bayern again this year. And there's a few other big games. It's kind of tight at the top. It's only 7 points that separate the top 4 clubs right now.
Yeah, I think that was one of our questions. Us not being avid Bundesliga fans by any means, but how would the quality of play come in? We all know that Bayern is that dominant team who tends to carry the league. I think didn't they fire their coach back in October or November, and like you said, somehow they're always ending up at the top. I think for me, watching a couple of games this weekend, including the Bayern game, who they fairly handily pulled off that 2-0 win, but the other games were solid. But I also think that you wouldn't necessarily think that a lot of no-loss players would be out of place were they to play in that league. Certainly a different style sometimes, and playing for some different coaches, but on the whole, I don't think that MLS is that far behind where the Bundesliga is, especially at those mid to lower tier. So we're not expecting a MLS team to jump in like Bayern and compete for a Champions League trophy, but across the rest of the board, not really that far off.
Yeah, it'll be interesting just to watch. As we said, I'm gonna keep watching the soccer, and I'm gonna really love it. But we do have some other leagues that are thinking about starting up.
Are they though? Are they?
John kind of shook your head, so I'm gonna let you take it over. How are you feeling about this?
Sam struck a nerve early in today's show. The Premier League is just a debacle right now. To me, it's beyond frustrating just how much bickering is going on between these clubs to try to figure out how they're going to restart. Should they restart? When do they restart? Look, safety is absolutely a concern. It should be the top concern. And I think the UK has done a significantly worse job at handling this than Germany. So the fact that they're not back yet is not super surprising. But to hear some of these clubs that are, bottom of the table saying, we're not playing neutral site games. We had a number of home games stacked up and we want to be able to play at home. It's like, guys, two things. One, there's no crowd. So home, away, like it shouldn't really make that big of a difference. It's not like, playing away at Liverpool is all of a sudden going to be really that much different than playing them at home. They're just the best team. Like, they're going to be a tough game anywhere, but there's no, massive wall of fans to make it harder and harder on the players. And I think the other side of the coin is if the choice is you play in neutral sites or you don't play at all, why would you not be pushing, especially these teams in a relegation battle, why would you not be pushing for a clear chance for survival? And I think that's what frustrates me more than anything here. But the British government's come out and said, I think they're willing to entertain games actually at the stadiums they were originally scheduled for now, which is good. Let's hope the Brits can behave and stay away from the ground so we don't have issues outside. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of my 2 cents. They got to figure this out soon because, they're going to be playing games 3-4 times a week to try to get this done if they keep dragging it out much longer, and no one wants that.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Black.
I was going to say, I definitely agree with you. I think that the distinction over neutral site games, now that we've seen a weekend of games being played in home stadiums where there's not a huge difference, particularly in a country like England where there's travel time involved, but it's nowhere near the same level as you'd see in, say, the MLS. Like, there's no Vancouver to Miami flight or trying to handle that. We'll talk a little bit later in the show about ideas that MLS has for dealing with this, but I really think that the hullabaloo over trying to do neutral site games or taking away home advantages and all that stuff, it's really just teams posturing, doing everything they can. If you feel like you're going to go down or you're even in danger of it, the penalties are so severe financially that you've got to do everything you can. And I really can't blame the teams for sticking to their guns. But at some point, if they do want to get the season done, they're going to have to come together and compromise.
Yeah, I was going to say something really similar. It feels like these teams are almost grasping at straws, and they're trying to come up with, potentially excuses. I mean, most of their season is done, so I feel like we know what everyone's form is right now. But yeah, it feels like they're trying to grasp at straws, anything they can do to, not go down. I saw at one point they were saying that they weren't going to play if there was still relegation or something like that. I think one or two of the teams said it, or a couple of players suggested it, but that just feels silly. I feel like the league just needs to kind of make a decision almost and say, if you don't play, that's a forfeited game. It's a silly thing that they're entertaining, and I feel like it's not really a conversation worth having. Just play the games. It's a really unfortunate situation, but the whole world is dealing with this situation right now, so you need to do your jobs.
Well, I'll disagree. I'll take the counterpoint here. There is no precedent here. So Germany just restarted, but the French league shut it off, and then the Dutch league completely canceled and said there's no pro rel this year because we can't finish the season. So they're kind of supported and saying, look, these other leagues have stopped and canceled because they don't get to finish the league properly. I mean, it's a huge deal. I don't know the inner workings of the lower tiers of the EPL teams, but I know in MLS, you play differently if you're at home or if you're away. And I know New York City has a way smaller pitch. Their play style is suited to a smaller pitch. If you're asked or whoever's in the relegation zone and you play like that and you have to now play at Wembley where it doesn't suit your style and the grass is longer so the ball plays quicker and all that, those are serious factors. And you're looking at other leagues where it was canceled. It is their job to play soccer, but is it their job to risk their lives so that they can get relegated for our entertainment? I don't know.
I mean, I understand your point, but I think, the league as a whole has come out and said that they're restarting. Those other leagues made different decisions, but this league is, saying this. And there's almost the argument that, getting promoted back up might be easier next year, because I have seen a lot of things saying that, these lower tier teams are definitely going to struggle. And a lot of them are potentially going to have to fold, and it might, they might be able to come back after a couple of years, but, this is financially hurting a lot of people. And, in my mind, the sooner you get soccer started up, even like the higher tiers, that's just going to trickle down and help the lower tiers. So I think that you're a professional soccer player and you need to be able to play on different, field types. And again, it's an unprecedented situation, but you're a professional. Everybody in their jobs right now are having to adapt to working differently. I can't decide not to do my job because I'm not going into the office. I just need to adapt, and I think they do too.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a ton of money at play here, and one of the things that really is of interest to the viewers is the relegation battle. I mean, there's no way around it. If you look at the table right now, Norwich are probably in trouble. They're sitting on 21 points. They've played 29 games. They're probably going down, but the slots, 15 through 19, the bottom six really as a whole, there's only 4 points that separate Villa in 19th, who have a game in hand, from Brighton in 15th. So once this restarts, it's going to be fascinating at the bottom of the table. I mean, Watford were bottom for most of the year. They brought in Nigel Pearson. They're now above the relegation zone, but 16, 17, and 18 are all tied on 27 points, and Bournemouth are currently relegated on goal differential. And the goal differential is shockingly close. It's 1 goal difference between Bournemouth and Watford. So to see this play out is going to be must-see TV if they can bring it back safely. But like we said at the beginning of this segment, that's got to be the first priority. I think that's the one thing that pretty much everybody agrees on. Do we have the testing? Do we have the ability to quarantine the players safely at facilities and at home? Germany's got a model. We'll see if England can follow it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think you're right. I think that the safety is, number one, and obviously all these conversations we're having afterwards are assuming that the players can do this safely. I think if the league decided that that's not a possibility and they did just decide to end the season, then I understand you have the argument for, not continuing or, not having Pro Rel this season, because there are those games and it is so tight, you don't know what's going to happen at the end. But I think if you have the ability to play the game, you need to be able to do your job, even if the circumstances are not ideal.
Yeah, I think I take both your points. To Joshua's point, yes, this is an entertainment product. It has to be safety first. You're not asking anyone to risk their lives to go out there. But I think more to the point, you've got a league of 20 teams, and you've got teams throughout the table. They're going to have to come to an agreement on how they're going to move forward either way. It seems like they've got splits, as you would expect, between teams that are trying to avoid going down, teams who are at the top looking to play in Champions League whenever that resumes. But the teams have to come together and make a decision, even if it is to suspend it. I don't think that's what any of us want, but they do have to make a decision at some point. And unfortunately, it seems like they're going to continue dragging it out and making it more painful. And really, like we see in anything else, it just makes everyone look silly.
It's a big week coming up for the Premier League. They've got meetings tomorrow for sure scheduled. And one of the things they're trying to appease is the players' concerns that playing the games and for sure being less than 6 feet apart from several other people. There's a study, and I unfortunately can't recall who put it out, but it basically said something that the strikers are the most impacted during a game, but it's still like on average less than 11 minutes of exposure. But there's allegedly an entire study that's dropping this week that And we're back here on Tried and True, the DC United postgame podcast presented by Heineken. And every once in a while, you just have to have a little unscheduled outage right in the middle of your podcast. But we're making the best of it. Happens to the best of us. But we've got a whole second segment prepped here because Major League Soccer has some very interesting plans about how they want to bring things back. And it involves potentially a trip to Disney World. We talked a bit about this last week, guys. And this week on The Athletic, more news was broke by Sam Scheschel. How do I say his last name, Joshua? You seem to be the best at it.
You got pretty close there.
But you don't get the real way.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on record and saying.
He's going to let me keep trying it until I get it right. But it's interesting. Disney's Coronado Springs Resort has emerged as the potential quote-unquote bubble, if you will, where the entire league would be quarantined during this potential MLS Cup Disney edition that they're talking about. And it could be up to 8 to 10 weeks of time that players without their families, team officials, potentially some media would have to be down there, referees. This whole concept to me is just, it's so interesting. And, I think we messaged a little bit yesterday about after watching the Bundesliga back in action and, they've got empty stadiums, but they're the real stadiums. It was still kind of cool. I'm at least a little concerned, and we saw some of this going on Twitter yesterday. Is a tournament at ESPN's Wide World of Sports going to give Major League Soccer, and forgive me ahead of time here, but a little bit of a Mickey Mouse feel?
Well, I won't pass up this opportunity to jab at Orlando finally making the playoffs, at the Disney World Cup. But yeah, Paul Torenia, a writer for The Athletic, I believe, talked about it, and I agree with him. It'll look like a U8 tournament, I think, if we're playing on practice fields and the view behind the playing game is another field and like some moms and lawn chairs. It's going to give us a real amateur look while these other teams are playing in these giant stadiums. MLS already has a hard time competing with the EPL and Bundesliga in terms of atmosphere and presentation, and this would just be a huge step back. I get that we're not Germany, we can't all fly private jets between little cities like that. We'd have to fly across country to do home and away, no locked door, behind closed door games. But this would just look so bad. And on top of the already confusing rules MLS has, you're going to try to incorporate some tournament into the standings, because that's what the implementation is, I think, right?
Yeah, well, I think those are two separate conversations, right? So, I'm just going to talk to the other point for the fields is I'm not a huge fan. That's not going to look fantastic. I think, hopefully they at least put banners up in the background or something. But I think it deserves more than Joshua's mentioned that, the United States is huge. And, technically this league is two countries big. We were talking with James Graham, just about the distance of DC. We were talking about, where players live, and some players play in Virginia. And, if you live in Virginia, it could take you 2.5 hours to drive up to a game. And, James Graham's in England. He was like, that's about the amount of time it could take you to drive from one side of the country to the other side of the country. It's not realistic that you're going to ask players to fly consistently across the country and, across the border to another country just to play games behind closed doors. Again, I absolutely understand that playing on a rec field is not going to look great. It's not going to be the best view, but the logistics of how big our country is and how big this league spans just geographically is so vastly different from what these European clubs are dealing with. When you add on top of that the fact that, the money in the budget is not for a private jet at every single flight, maybe that would alter the conversation, but that's not what we're talking about right now. They take a lot of commercial flights. I mean, it's really this or no soccer, and I'd rather have this. Like, it's just a different conversation. It's not that MLS is dropping the ball. It's not that, we're doing this because we're an amateur league. It's just unrealistic for us to be able to do it in the same way that leagues across the world are doing it.
I would rather have the games at Orlando City Stadium than at a practice field outside Disney. I think the visual look, me watching the game in Signal Iduna Park made a huge difference. If they were just on a regular field, I probably would have stopped watching because I have no interest in the team. I hardly know the players. And now I'm just watching, literally, like I said, it'll look like a U8 game. What's the difference?
And you talk about, when you're scheduling, and we haven't even seen how this is going to play out. But I know we saw some issues with that during DC United's preseason games, where it started getting dark. The lighting wasn't really set up for TV. It was fine for the players out there, and they've been playing that kind of thing their whole lives. But if you're trying to make games happen, especially in the evenings, on an area that's not set up for TV, perhaps you don't have those high vantage points that we like to be able to watch from and come to expect. I do think it's a problem, and I think you will turn off people who are trying to just turn it on because, hey, it's a sport, it's on, I want to watch it. That said, if that's what they have to do to get soccer back, I'm for it.
Yeah, I understand. I will say, to the point about why is everyone not just playing in the Orlando City Stadium, for the Bundesliga, players were entering the stadium at different times, like through the tunnel. One team would completely come out and then the other team would have to completely come out. Like, that's the effort that they were still going through to social distance. So, if MLS is playing back-to-back games in a weekend at the same venue, like, that is unrealistic to expect 5 different games to happen at one stadium on the same day at this point. Right. So I don't think that that's a realistic alternative.
But as far as traveling on private jets, the owners of this league have that money. They're already flying private jets from Vancouver to FC Dallas games to play in front of 3,000 people anyway. So track the 3,000 people, and now we have a completely safe and legitimate league going.
Well, I
agree. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, one thing to consider, the reporting so far has been about ESPN's Wide World of Sports, and obviously Disney has crazy hotel capacity, and ESPN's Wide World of Sports has just like an infinite number of fields. I think there's like 18 plus that could be considered soccer fields, and so to give all of the teams a place to practice, that really could fit the bill of you're staying right there at Coronado Springs, you're going to ESPN's Wide World of Sports to practice, but to play the games, you mentioned Orlando City Stadium, which absolutely the league's already indicated they wanted to use. Whatever it's called nowadays, I think it's Camping World Stadium, is a brisk walk away, right in the downtown area. I don't think there's going to be much going on there either, so that could be another opportunity to play there, which is where Orlando City played their games before their current stadium opened. And also, I thought I saw something else. Osceola, obviously I'm doing terrible at pronouncing today, County Stadium, was originally a baseball park that they've converted into a soccer-specific stadium for the league's, for Orlando City's B team that plays in USL League One. Osceola is the pronunciation. Thanks, Black. I appreciate that. So there's potentially 3 proper grounds that could be used, and in that case, if you're playing the games in those stadiums and you're just practicing in ESPN's Wide World of Sports, maybe some of the optics change.
Yeah.
I'd be for that. I think that's the best outcome because it really does, like Black said, this resuming now would not be for the diehard fans. Right? We want our soccer, but we will gladly come back whenever the league comes back. You don't have to worry about that. This is about striking now while there's no other sports going on. You need to have the presentation on point. You need the pregame from Fox. You need, Men in Blazers there, or at least off-site doing something. It's all about presenting MLS while there's nothing else and gaining those new things. That's what MLS is probably looking at on the backside. And doing that safely.
Well, and we've talked about that before. You want to be one of the first ones back. You want to be grabbing people and saying, hey, this is a product that's worth watching, but you don't want to do that at the cost of a casual fan turning it on and saying, yep, this is exactly what I expected. It feels like I'm watching a high school game, which some people will do, but yeah, I understand that the hardcore fans are going to come back and the hardcore fans are going to watch this whenever it comes up. But I do think you need to take that with a grain of salt and actually make sure that it's a product worth watching.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead, John.
Well, I was going to shift gears and break down a little bit just of the logistics here. I think that this is not necessarily a half-baked idea. And we talked, a little bit earlier in the segment about how the U.S. is obviously different than Europe in the sense that, and Joshua, you mentioned it in the earlier segment, right? I mean, France and the Netherlands have canceled the leagues entirely. Germany's already restarting. England and Spain and Italy are all still trying to bring it back. And if you overlay Europe on the United States, it's not that dissimilar. And so getting all the teams to one place to practice and play is really the only way in my mind in the short term that this happens. I mean, I don't think we're potentially playing in home stadiums for several months, and I think that's what the league is trying to avoid here is how do we get this back sooner rather than later, and then when we can go back to that, if the players have been training and playing meaningful games, then there's no ramp-up time. You're just back in it. And if you look at, potentially what this bubble would look like, there's almost 2,000 rooms in Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. And so if you figure each team brings, 50 people between players and coaching staff, I mean, that's easy. You can fit all those people, no problem. You've got room for officials, you've got room for media, and you could potentially lock down that entire property, and this could work. And as long as you're not allowing other folks, near the training grounds at ESPN's Wide World of Sports, and you're very carefully bringing, shepherding the teams to and from practice and to and from the games, and say you want to bring additional media to the stadiums, as long as they're coming in a totally different entrance, going up to the press box, doing their thing, there's a way this could work. And I think we all are in agreement that the optics would be much better at these stadiums than at ESPN's Wide World of Sports. But maybe some of the consolation games later on in the tournament are staged at ESPN's Wide World of Sports. But I was trying to do the math earlier after Bayern scored their second goal and I had enough of that game. How could you potentially break down 26 teams? Is a terrible number. It's just, if we were, last season, 24 would have made this so much easier. But 26 teams, they've talked about potentially a group style start to this, almost like a World Cup or a Champions League, and then you go into more of a knockout round. What do you do? Is it 4 groups of 5, 1 group of 6? Is it 5 groups of 4, 1 group of 6? 2 groups of 6, 2 groups of 7, depending on how you want to get all the games played. And then maybe some of the group winners get buys into a 26 team like knockout stage to do all the teams make it, and seeding is based on the groups. I mean, there's so many different ways to go here. What do you guys think would be not only the best for the players, but the most fun and captivating to watch?
Those are 2 very different questions, John. I think, for the sake of playing this out, and, from what I've read, they want all the teams to be playing as many games and that's why, you mentioned the consolation games. That's why they're having those is, they are trying to cater to all the fans. And as we all know, when you get to the MLS playoffs, fans drop off once your team is out, you're not watching. So I do think some type of everybody makes it to the knockout round. They're going to try to give everyone as many quote unquote meaningful games as possible. I mean, I don't envy the people who are doing this, but I think them saying it's going to be World Cup style definitely indicates some sort of knockout round. You're not just playing everyone across the league. It's going to be very defined groups.
And I think it's a lot of it's going to depend on how they break it down as far as how much time they're trying to fill. There's a big difference between filling 8 to 10 weeks or if you're trying to get it done in 4 to 6 weeks, and how that breaks down. I think for me, I'd like to see the largest groups you can practically do have as many games as possible within those pods, and then use that to inform the seeding. I think to Sam's point that trying to put every team in the knockout bracket is probably necessary, but there are certainly teams that you would rather avoid playing. if you have the chance. The consolation games, sure. I'll probably watch DC United if they get knocked out, but hopefully I'm watching them all the way to the Disney Cup. That being said, I think the consolation games, they work great if you're playing it in youth soccer and you've got guys who've traveled for a weekend of games, but I don't think you necessarily need to do it when you're trying to say this matters, means something. You get the same kind of friendly atmosphere. Like, I'm going to be much more upset if one of our players gets themselves hurt in a consolation game that doesn't actually have any impact on standings. There's nothing at stake. They're just playing the game so that they can fill the time. That's concerning to me.
So you raise a really critical point there, though, which is if the league is trying to make sure that all the teams are playing a similar number of games, do the consolation games count? Do all these games count toward the standings? I mean, that's something that has to be figured out here. I mean, it's been thrown around that this is all for a potential Champions League spot, which would be awesome, and in my opinion would be enough to get me to watch it. It's almost like a mini Open Cup. But if you bring in the variable of if these games count towards the MLS standings, are you still broken into conferences? Does everything realign as a result to try to figure out playoffs? I mean, that makes things a lot more complicated.
I think it has to fit into the season, right? I think we're already past due 2 months on games, and if we do this will probably take another 2 months. So it has to count towards the season table, and then from there you could do a playoff based on that. But I wouldn't mind. I've seen what you kind of broke it down into. I like the 2 groups of 6, 2 groups of 7. You could split the conferences, have them all play each other like that. And that would be pretty similar to what we do in MLS anyway. Like the real points are within your conference anyway. And then that has the playoff implementations. You start from playoffs from there. It wouldn't be too far from an MLS season.
I think that, I disagree. I think you don't count this as an MLS season. Like, I think, yeah, you can keep it within the conferences. You can honestly do whatever you want, but I think you call a spade, you call it the Disney Cup, and you say this season isn't an actual season. You say, no one's getting a star in their jersey this year. No one's getting the MLS Cup or the Supporters Shield. You're right, like the Champions League spot, like would be interesting. It would make it a meaningful tournament. And I think that the league just kind of leans into like, yeah, this is silly and like weird and not what anyone wanted. But I don't think you can compare it to a league. I don't think nobody who wins this season is going to be able to say that they won in the same way that people have done in seasons past.
MLS
it's not the same.
Has to give this credibility to get people to watch. If you don't give it credibility, if you don't give it real meaning, why is a casual fan going to come on and they'll explain that this just doesn't count? This is just for fun. That's not where the competitive nature that all these players, all these fans have.
Well,
that's not how you.
Well, that's where you put it, like in a Champions League spot. Like you make something out of it, or you put like extra prize money at the end or whatever. But I think that it delegitimizes what it means to put a star on the crest if you say that you can win a knockout round tournament in 4 weeks and then suddenly you're an MLS champ. Like that does not mean the same thing.
Do you think an LAFC fan would agree with you? Because their roster is set as far as a dynasty. We know how dynasties work, or these franchises work in MLS. It takes years to get them primed, and once they're primed, you have a very short window to actually cash in on that. Would you be saying that if your team was stacked and ready to win an MLS Cup?
I think that every other fan in the league, I think that if your team wins, maybe, yeah, you say that that's legitimate, but I think every other bitter fan who didn't win, especially the ones who make it pretty far in the tournament are like, well, that wasn't legitimate anyway. Or, say like LA Galaxy somehow wins and gets a 6th star. You think anyone's going to tell them that they have so many stars in their chest and that additional one is legitimate? Like, I don't think this is setting the winning team up for success if you try to say it's the same type of meaningful title.
So I don't think that. Go ahead, Black.
Well, I think it gets back to the original point we were saying of how much time are you trying to fill with this, and is it replacing the season, or is it something that is allowing them to play some kind of games that are meaningful? Because I think you can attach some kind of standings to it. Maybe it's the consolation games you're playing or within your conference, or you find some way to. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but if it's something that you end by the end of July, then you can say you can have games by August, and then you get another 2 months of regular season games, and you reschedule. it's not going to be great. It's not going to be perfect, but I think at least that way it can work. Now, I certainly agree with Sam that if you are saying that this is what the MLS season is going to be, we're going to keep them in Disney World for 3 months, and whatever happens from that is how we're going to declare a champion. That I'm not here for. I'll certainly put the Mickey Mouse logo right next to the stars on a jersey, but I'm not going to really come home and say that, hey, we won a championship no matter what that format was.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was headed on this too. Like, I think that this is a nice interlude to kind of level the playing field of everyone can train, no matter where your team is geographically located. If you're all in Orlando, you've all got the same rules about training. You've all got the same rules about games. We play some games. We have a tournament that matters because you get a Champions League spot out of it. But if it were me, I would say the games potentially don't count towards the standings. Maybe you're trying to get everybody to play the same number of games. And you're right, you're going to have challenges in that consolation bracket of like, okay, these are basically friendlies. But sure, maybe they are basically friendlies. Maybe you've got some of the kids for DC United that were going to be potentially logging minutes at Loudoun. Now they're playing. And then once that's done, if you can make the assumption, which I don't think we can at all, but if you could make the assumption that then we can go back to playing in empty stadiums, but at least, at the stadiums, then maybe you're doing a shortened season where you play every team in your conference one time, you build a playoff bracket, based off of that, and you say go, and like that's your MLS season, which is obviously much, much smaller, but at least it's somewhat similar to what we know.
And yeah, I think the fact that they're talking about doing this like tournament style and they're not just having teams play each other and they're not just trying to make up the games that we've missed indicates to me that like this season is not being made up. You know what I mean? Like we've already lost 10 weeks of the season. The fact that you're going to take another like 2 to 3 months potentially because they need the weeks of, training per the CBA, and then they're going to actually start playing games. The fact that the league is taking this time and wasting it on a tournament, regardless of what that tournament ends up meaning at the end, to me means that we're not trying to resume afterwards. It's not like at the end of the tournament we can be like, okay, we're going back to the season. It's now September and we're going to try to make up an entire season in 4 months. Like that to me is just not realistic. And I think that that's okay. I would prefer that they just all go down to Orlando and like play season games and try to make it up and just call that a season. But I think if they're going to do this tournament style, I think it's the most okay for MLS because we were so early in our season. For these other leagues in Europe, they were having to make much more difficult decisions because they were so far into their season that they had the ability to just, play these 10 games in a confined way and potentially elongate their season and make it work. But for us, I think we had so much to do and we've lost so much time that I just don't see us being able to regain that time because MLS is going with this tournament.
So if I understand you right, Sam, your problem is not so much with the fact that we're coming back, but the fact that they're talking about doing it in a tournament format. In your ideal situation, we would be saying, hey, we can't have teams playing at the different home stadiums. They're not able to train in certain areas. I think the California teams still weren't able to do individual training. But if we're going to do this, we need to just have them all in one place and just play the season like you would normally do. No extra kind of gimmicks to it and just use that as filler time. Is that kind of what I'm hearing here?
I think if we were to be able to crown like an MLS champion and give a supporter shield that's at least comparable to the way that we've done for the past 25 years, that's what needed to happen. The league has not chosen to do that. They've chosen to do this World Cup tournament style. And to me, that indicates that the league is acknowledging that we're not getting back on track with this season. They're trying to change the season to make it something different. And to me, that's not comparable.
I think, and I'll go Team Joshua on this, that I'd be willing to wager that the tournament down in Orlando has effects on MLS Cup. Either the winner is MLS Cup champion or the winner gets points towards the league table and then it goes on into the playoffs and then that becomes MLS Cup.
I mean, you could do it the way they do the Campeones Cup, between the winner of Liga MX and the winner of MLS Cup. If you have enough to do both tournaments. it would be different, and I don't necessarily want to see that moving forward. Like, I don't necessarily want the Open Cup team playing the MLS champion to declare the United States champion. But I think we may be getting a little bit too far into the weeds. We've been talking for the last 8 to 10 weeks about how much we want soccer back and how desperate we are. We did an entire show on a FIFA tournament. At the end of the day, I want soccer back however we can get it. The powers that be are going to make their decision there, and we're probably going to come on here and we're going to have issues with it, but at least we get soccer back.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's two key things that we have to say, about this concept, and one is that it's very much not official yet. This is what the league wants to do. There clearly has been enough work going into it, where they've found a number of things that seem very doable, but the players have to agree to this, and they have not yet. And it's very, very pertinent that the new CBA was agreed to, but not necessarily signed and ratified yet. So there's that variable that's still out there that the owners could lock out the players in an attempt to get them to try to play and blah, 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 which would be terrible and even more terrible with a pandemic in the background. So hopefully this is something that the league and players can work together on in trying to figure out. But the other thing, is that we're all hoping we can come back and play some sort of season after this, but we don't know. And so I don't know that the league has necessarily come out and said that they want these games to count for the league standings or that they, want them to impact MLS Cup. But I'm wondering if they're just trying to buy some time here in, getting players fit again,